The next important feature in Android N is the multi-window. So in this current version, Android is supporting multi-window from the OS level itself. Few attributes that Android has added along in the manifest, right? So let me go to okay, so just letting you know, I'm using a sample app, which essentially is, there's a home screen which has list of products, and click on that goes to a product detail. Just using this as a sample app to show the entire multi-window. Okay, so Android has added this attribute which is called Android : resizable activity, and this can be true or false. Right? So this essentially means, can this be in a split screen mode? So let's, and just to clarify, by default this is true for all screens. So any app which is coming up now will, by default, this will be true unless you explicitly want it, which is, Android does not recommend you to do it, but I'll show you all the scenarios. So let me run. Yeah. So this is the app. So to activate the multi-screen mode, you essentially do a long press here. Let me restart my emulator. Just a minute. I just did a long press here, and the main screen, which is a list of products, right, that became in a split screen mode. And you can start looking at any of other apps simultaneously as well. So this is how any user will essentially activate the multi-screen in Android N. So the next thing is, so let's assume that you have the product list, right? Now I specified here as the product list as true. And suppose the product details activity, I specify here false. So what am I trying to tell here? I'm trying to tell that the list of activities is resizable, whereas the detail is not resizable. Can anyone guess what will happen? Okay. Okay, so that's what is the, I think, normal expectation, but that's not what happens actually. So let me, I did this. It opened the list, the detail also opened in the same split screen mode. So the essential, the way Android says is, I hope most of you have Android knowledge here, think about tasks. So Android has a thing called tasks, right? So essentially, the root task, whichever is the root task, whatever the particular attribute that the root task has, will be given to all the activities under that. So in this case, the root task was the list of activities, right? So the list had it as true, and therefore because the detail is also in the same task, this is by default, this given as true. Is there? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, I'll come to that. I'll come to that. Yes. So if you do that, so what happens in that scenario? So the scenario that he's saying, let me actually reproduce that scenario. Let me do that scenario now. So I am, just a minute. Yeah. So this is what you said, right? So I'm starting the activity with a new task, have a new one with affinity as some empty thing, and then resizable as false. So any guesses what will happen now? Okay, let's give it a shot. Okay. So essentially what this means is, this is a root task now, right? Because a new task was created, this is a root task, so whatever the attribute for this will go. Right? It's similar because I pass the root task as I made the root task here as true. That's why it was allowing, it was doing split screen for both of them. Suppose it was false, it will not allow for anything. It just the same thing holds true. Whatever is for root task will hold true. So that's the first attribute which Android has added as part of this. By default, this is true. Just to, so any apps that come to Android N will have this as true, right? So that's the next thing which Android has introduced. So let me get a scenario. So there's a Chrome. The Chrome app is open. You're seeing a location of, suppose, Thoughtworks office, right? So Thoughtworks office has an address written. A link click on that will open something in Maps, right? You might want to see both of them parallelly, right? You want to see what is happening here and what is happening here as well. That, any idea how we can achieve that? What are the ways in which you can achieve both of them to be seen parallelly, now that we know split screen mode is there? Should I repeat the question if you're not got it? Okay. So there is Chrome app. Chrome is open. You have the Thoughtworks location in with the address there. When you click on this link, the Maps opens. Google Maps opens. But you want to see both of them simultaneously. Now in split screen, now you can see both of them simultaneously, right? So how do you, now if you look at this particular scenario that I showed, it actually opened in a new, completely new, the entire full screen. I don't want that. I want only a part of it. How do I do it? If you open in the same task, it will take the same attribute as what is there, and it will open in the same place. I can't see both of them simultaneously, right? Yeah, exactly. That's what Android has done. So yeah, this is the flag, by the way. Flag activity launch adjacent. So let me show how it behaves now. So here in this scenario, what I'm doing is opening the detail, which is of course in a new task, because I have to open in a new task, and it will be shown adjacent to each other. Is that fine? So both of them can be seen simultaneously. This is very useful. Now in this case, Chrome will be here and Maps will be here, the example that I told you. Okay. Who's asking? Oh, yes. Sorry. Yeah. What if the intent is an implicit intent to your app, or you're saying you're opening an implicit? So if you open with flag adjacent, yes, it will open like this. Okay. Yeah, first chooser, of course. The first chooser, right? The chooser, unless you have already specified the default. You have already specified the default, then that's a different case. But if you have not specified the default, then chooser and then this. But by the way, I mean, so that's an assumption. I mean, I have not tried that. We can give that a shot little later. Okay. So this is the next thing. So this is two things that I talked about. One is the resizable, and next is launch adjacent. These are two flags which are now added. Next is I'll not go deep into this, but just letting you guys know. So each activity, you can essentially specify what is my minimum size that I require. What is my minimum size, what is my maximum size and all that. So in the manifest file, there is a layout. For some reason, my studio is not suggesting that, but there's a layout attribute which says min height, min width, and all the scenarios that is there. What you should not be allowed a size higher than this and greater than this, and all that scenarios. So this is the new attribute which is added to the manifest. For each activity, you can specify. So one thing now, now let me come to the configuration level changes, right? How do you recognize a particular screen is portrait or landscape? How do you, I agree, but I'm just, the basic, how do you say this is portrait or how do you say this is landscape? Length is higher than the width, the basic, right? I'm not going deep into that. So what about in this scenario? What is this? This is? I'm talking about my shopping app. Is it in landscape or portrait? It is in? Okay. Okay. Now? No. So that's. By the way, I'm talking about this part, not the list. I mean, not the detail part. Only this part I'm talking about. So the activity just it continues to work as is, right? It continues to see the way it recognizes portrait and landscape is the same way. So I'll give you an example. The way so what I have done here. Yeah. So what I've done here is I have added a text view. Okay. In text view, essentially it prints the value of this particular orientation, right? So in regular scenario, it just prints portrait, whereas in values hyphen land, it prints landscape, right? So let's go and see. In this scenario, expected, right? This is portrait. Now, okay? This is landscape here. I can even reduce it further just in case. So that's the reason I said, how do you recognize it a portrait or landscape, right? The length is higher, then that is portrait, otherwise it's landscape. Okay. Now, the interesting point here is, let me make a small, so the way I am populating this portrait and landscape values, right? So I'll just show that. So let me select that. So what I'm doing here is just finding the view by ID, saying get activity, get me the text for orientation. Basic, right? Nothing different here. Any doubts here? This part, only this part of the code I'm talking about. Yeah? Now, let me make a small change in the code. Can this be done? Just to get the resource, I just need some context. It can be application context or any context, right? So I say get activity, get application context, orientation. Expected behavior, no change. Is there any change? It's going to be the same. Activity, yes, it restarts its, yes, in a sense you're right. It might or might not restart depending upon what you tell in config changes, but you're almost there. Okay, let me show the behavior actually. It should not. So what are you expecting here in case in the split screen mode? In the split screen mode. In the split screen mode, portrait. Okay, I mean I see different answers, so let me actually show it. It's portrait. So essentially the application is still in the portrait mode. It's just that that particular activity is in the landscape. So when you, so what I'm trying to get as recommendation here is whenever you're picking the values for the UI elements, right? Always pick up from the activities context. Don't pick up from the applications context. And this is what Android has recommended long time back, right? It's just that now we can see the effect of it now here in this change. So any UI elements, you should get it from the current activity and not from the application, always. This is the essential Android recommendation. Any doubts? Any? Okay, so few things that I can add here is, one more Android recommendation that Android is adding is now your apps, your display size, right? Given the entire screen space for you, it has become a part of it, right? And it can be dragged and dropped and all that, though you can specify the minimal width. So Android is recommending you to start designing for smaller screens. That could include 220 as well. Start designing for smaller 220 and scale it to the higher levels. Scale those to higher levels. Or do an adaptive UI, which can essentially scale. Right? This is the, this is our earlier assumption was at least itna to rahega hi. This is what will be there always, right? No. Now the size is reduced. Now it can be 220 as well, or it can be lesser as well, right? So the size, minimal size that we are because of split screen mode. So you should start designing for them as well. Don't forget about that. So if you go from larger to higher, it becomes tougher. Larger to lower, do it the other way around, is what Android is recommending. Okay. And whenever an activity goes to a split screen mode, as he said, the activity restarts. The entire life cycle is, it essentially restarts. The new this one is there. And as usual, if you don't, so suppose your app was in portrait earlier, and if you do it a landscape now, and if you had supported it earlier, it used to restart, right? So the same thing holds here as well. If you don't want that, we used to say Android config changes, right? That the same thing holds here as well. So Android : config changes. Now the interesting thing that is there is from N onwards, if the target is N, if you specify the screen orientation, Android : orientation as portrait, that will be ignored. That will not be taken into consideration at all. So if you have your target as N is what I'm talking about. If target is N, that will be ignored. That will not be taken care because it has to manage the split screen as well. Okay? In the sense, multi-screen means? Okay. That will be ignored. So essentially what it says is, if you're in the splash screen mode, you press the overview button as a splash screen is loading, right? So it now is in landscape mode, right? Correct? So essentially what Android is saying is you have to support, if the target is N, start supporting both. You cannot restrict to it. And I mean, the thing is, if the target is not N, if you lock your orientation, if you say portrait to an activity, then multi-screen is not supported there. Split screen is not supported there. If the target is not N, is what I'm saying. Okay? Yes, sure. If you have, I think I forgot to mention one lifecycle event that happens. So let me explain that, and then I'll answer your question as well, right? So what is important now is when you go to overview, let me do it fast because there's not much time. Whenever you're in this mode, right, two activities are visible, correct? Now, what lifecycle event are they in currently? Yeah, so one which you're currently working on is in essentially the resume state, right? It's currently in the resume state, it's doing its work, okay? And one which is not, I mean, you're not working on is in the pause state. Now, why is this important is, let's assume that's a video playing app, right? Video playing app. Normally, what happens in a video playing app? When you come out, it gets paused, correct? So in this, I mean, now if essentially what they might be doing is when in the life cycle of on pause the video, right? Now that's not what you can do here. Because you want to see the video as well as do something simultaneously. That's the essential idea of this, right? So when do you pause the video then? Yeah, exactly. So on stop and started back on start, right? So that is, and then this one, whenever you turn this one on configuration changed is the lifecycle event. So essentially, lifecycle wise, there's no change. Android earlier also advised you to do these things in onstart and unstop. It's just that we are getting to know its effects now. One more, I mean, most of us, what we do is the broadcast receivers, we register in on resume and unregister in on pause. You can't do that now, right? So these things are very important. These were earlier advice, it's just that it's getting affected now. Okay. On pause, essentially on pause is it's visible. Partially visible. On pause is a partially visible, is a visible screen. It's a visible. So even earlier, on pause used to be the visible part, right? I mean, there's nothing changed here in the way Android said what is on pause. Here also it is visible, and therefore it is in on pause state, just that no active thing is happening there. Yeah. So in this case, it's like you are in a 220 dp, right? Yeah. So that is the category. So it's essentially your screen size is for your app is reduced to this much. So whatever is your layout for that particular dimension, that will be taken. So for example, this is 220 dp. So assume this till here to be 220, right? And if you have a particular layout file for that 220 dp defined, that qualified defined, that will be the layout which is going to be drawn. Should I repeat again? So let's assume this is a list, right? This is a list which you drew it. At the same time, there can be a layout which you have drawn for a 220 dp, right? Now, when you go to a split screen mode, Android will restart the activity, right? When it restarts, it will look for what is the layout. There is a 220 dp that it can find. It will go and load that particular layout. Exactly. Yeah, so this the way I did for strings, right? Strings.xml, I said values hyphen land. I said values hyphen land for this. And in split screen mode, it actually picked up that. So it's exactly the similar. Assume this, the entire screen size for your app is reduced this much. That's the essential idea. There are a few more things in multi-screen, but I think we don't have time. So if any questions, you can ask me personally.